Ladies, gentlemen, and all the distinguished guests, I am delighted to welcome you to the conference, Making South-South Cooperation Work for Africa, Challenges and Opportunities for the African Union as a member of the G20. This event is organized by the Jindal Center for G20 Studies, the Asia Foundation, and the Australian Government's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And I, Sevala, am honored to be your master of ceremony for this momentous occasion. To begin with, I'd like to introduce to you the Asia Foundation. The Asia Foundation is a non-profit organization promoting peaceful, prosperous, and an open Asia Pacific, and is involved in various projects to support development across Asia. India, under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi, has made significant strides in championing the concerns, challenges, and aspirations of the developing nations, with a particular focus on Africa. Their efforts have resulted in African Union's historic inclusion as a full member of the G20, placing African Union on par with the European Union. This marks a pivotal moment in global cooperation, positioning Africa as a key player in addressing shared international concerns. Today, we will explore how this inclusion can shape a more transparent, secure, and globally connected financial landscape, discussing pioneering initiatives like Kenya's M-Pesa and the African Union's advanced cross-border payment system to set to boost intra-African trade. Furthermore, Africa's abundant clean energy resources, including solar power and essential elements like cobalt, manganese, and platinum, which offer significant contribution to the global response to climate change. This conference provides a platform for African perspectives to define solutions to global challenges and their role in global collaboration, and how the G20 member states can enable a more stable and equitable growth of journey for Africa. We embark on a journey of exploration, fostering meaningful dialogue and forging connections that will shape our world's future. Welcome to this extraordinary gathering where we seek to uncover the opportunities and the challenges that lie ahead and can chart a course towards a brighter and more inclusive world. Thank you so much for joining us today. It is now my distinct privilege to invite our esteemed host for the welcome address. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Nandita Baruah, Country Representative for India at the Asia Foundation. Ms. Nandita Baruah brings a wealth of experience with over 30 years of dedication to the development sector in Asia, having served in multiple countries across the region. She has worked in multilateral and bilateral agencies, heading national and regional programs addressing women's empowerment, urban governance, regional trade, water governance, migration mobility, human trafficking, judicial sector reforms, and human rights. Her role as the Asian Foundation's country representative in India underscores her commitment to fostering positive change. I now pass on the mic to Ms. Baruah.
Good afternoon, everyone, distinguished guests, excellencies, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, and special thanks to Additional Secretary Mude from Ministry of External Affairs for helping us facilitate and host this event. A very warm welcome to all the delegates from the African embassies and the other embassies who have made time to come for this event today. I think I would begin by saying that why we thought of hosting this event in collaboration with the OP Jindal. Now, Asia Foundation's partnership with OP Jindal University, and especially the G20 Center, has been established over a long period of time. The center itself is new, but the university, as we know, has been around since, I think, 2013, if I'm not mistaken. And the partnership goes back to really trying together to really curate conversations that bring in different perspectives on key development challenges that the world is facing. This particular conference, I think, is very timely and key because with the elevation of the African Union to a permanent position within the G20, it opens up the whole question of what is the African voice going to be and how is it going to influence global geopolitics. We are going through challenging times, as we all know, and I don't think I need to reiterate that. But I do think that for an entire continent in Africa, this is really an opportunity for us to engage with and really get a perspective of voices from other countries who have seen challenge, have overcome it, and have shown resilience. And I think it's for the world here, for us also not to look at how do we collaborate with Africa, but how does African voices influence what others are doing. I think this is really an opportunity. With that in mind, we wanted to bring this conference and get those voices out for all of us to really think through what the African story of growth has been. An entire continent which has shown a lot of resilience in the face of a lot of conflict. Despite a lot of downturns in the economy, that's the large part of the world which is still showing promise of growth, and also managing and mitigating multiple challenges which are both climate-induced and others. So the Asia Foundation is really proud to be a part of this partnership with the OP Jindal Global University and the G20 Center. The foundation itself, of course, has 18 country offices in Asia. We have footprints right down to the Indo-Pacific, but we don't really have an office in Africa. However, we do have enough collaborations with academic institutions in Africa, and for us this is really to explore, even institutionally, as an organization, how do we strengthen those collaborations to bring in a collective voice that is going to really provide certain fresh perspectives to challenges that we deal with as development sector players, as people who are dealing with changing economic issues around the world. I just want to say that when we are getting into this conversation, I think I'm not sure about the house rules, but I'm assuming, Mohan, Ambassador Mohan Kumar, that it's going to be recorded? Yes. So conversations will be recorded. So just wanted to put that on the table. And the reason is that we hope that post this conversation, as we have done in our other conversations around G20, we are looking to bring in certain policy briefs or issue briefs that can influence the debate going forward or influence the conversation going forward. So I'm hoping that this is going to give us an opportunity to hear a lot more about voices that have been heard and voices that have been unheard, and hopefully help us to think through how we as a collective world really meet those challenges. And as the Prime Minister, Honorable Prime Minister of India says, Vasudevaya Kutumbakam, we are after all a one world, and we are facing those challenges collectively, and the more perspectives and voices we have, especially from a point of sustainability and resilience, the better placed we are going to be to resolve some of those issues. So with that, I want to thank you all for being here today, and I look forward to the conversation and being a part of the conversation. I will now hand it over to Ambassador Mohan Kumar to deliver his remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nandita, and a very good afternoon to all of you. Thank you very much for making it. Just a word about this space. It's called the Jindal International Academy, and what we have done over the last 6 months is to host a number of conversations which are candid, provocative, and which will definitely foster a public debate on some crucial issues. We've had the G20 summit itself being dissected by the research group of the University of Toronto. We had a wonderful debate on law and human rights with a lot of former chief justices and so on, and this is certainly part of that particular conversation. We call it a space where you can have frank conversations, and we've had a number of conversations. Always a pleasure to partner with the Asia Foundation, so thank you very much, Nandita, for partnering with us. I want to in particular thank the Additional Secretary Africa from the Ministry of External Affairs, Ambassador Mude, without whose help this would not have been possible. So thank you very much, sir. This conference is obviously about Africa, as Ms. Nandita Baruah said, but why Africa? Because I think it matters hugely, and if you allow me, I'll make 3 points. One, there was a late Swedish political scientist by the name of Hans Rosling, and if you haven't heard about it, it's worth Googling and finding out what he talked about. He used to talk about a population pin code for the world, and he said the present population pin code is 1114, and what this 1114 means is that Americas has a population of 1 billion approximately. You've got then Europe, which is 1 billion. You've got Africa, which is 1 billion. Now it's about 1.3, but we will take it as 1 billion. And then Asia, which is 4 billion. And he predicted that by 2040, this pin code will become 1125. So Americas will continue to be 1 billion. Europe will probably be less than 1 billion, but we will give it the benefit of the doubt and say 1 billion because fertility rates are dropping so heavily in Europe. Africa will double its population. That is the key story here. And Asia will go from 4 to 5, thanks mainly to India, because China has already peaked. But I think by 2050, 2060, what I'm saying is Africa will be 2.3 billion. In a population of 9 billion or 8.5 billion, which makes it actually 20% of the global population. And that makes Africa hugely important. Of course, a challenge, of course, opportunities, but whichever way you look at it, you can't ignore Africa. The second is that whichever big issue of the world you take today, whether it's climate change, whether it's public health, whether it is debt, you cannot really ignore Africa, because Africa has to be part of the solution. Otherwise, you are unlikely to achieve any of those SDGs, frankly. I would say, frankly, Africa and South Asia, but in particular Africa. Without Africa, I don't see how climate change can be resolved, how the debt issue can be resolved, how public health issues can be resolved. So I think it really is very, very important that this continent gets the attention it deserves, and I think it has got the attention it deserves. That's one of the things we will be talking in the two panels that we have following the inauguration of this conference. Inclusive economic growth has become a mantra, but again, I don't see how this can be achieved on a global scale without Africa pulling its weight. So for a variety of reasons, we thought that is the Asia Foundation and the Jindal Global Center, which I have the honor of directing or heading, we thought that Africa is the subject on which this conversation should take place today. So we're very, very grateful for the number of African diplomatic missions which are represented today. I realize it's a late Friday, Monday, Tuesday are off, so really thank you so much for being here today. But we would like all of you to participate as much as possible, because we need to hear from Africa what they think about the issues that we are talking about. So with those few words, once again, it's my great pleasure and honor to really welcome all of you to this Jindal space for debate and provocative discussions, which we hope will actually advance the agenda. We also think that a lot of the debates in Delhi also happen around other issues, and sometimes Africa may or may not figure in it, which is why we thought there should be a conversation with central primary focus on Africa. So that's really the background to this discussion. I do not believe Ambassador Mude deserves or requires any introduction. He is well known among those who know Africa. He is the additional secretary dealing with Africa, which, for those of you who don't know, in the Ministry of External Affairs, he is really the person who provides policy inputs to the Foreign Secretary and the Foreign Minister, and that is how policy on Africa gets made. So I'm particularly honored that Additional Secretary Ambassador Mude is here today. If I can request him please to inaugurate this important conference. And once again, sir, thank you very much for coming, and it's a pleasure to have you here.
My senior colleagues, Ambassador Bhatia sir, Ambassador Pinak sir, of course Ambassador Mohan Kumar, and Madam Nandita Baruah, Country Representative to India Asia Foundation, Excellencies, colleagues from my ministry, and well, I take this as a privilege and proud moment to be part of this excellent work undertaken by the Jindal Group, Global University, and the Asia Foundation. I'm extremely happy to share the developments had taken place in recent time, particularly with Africa. I also would like to touch upon a few important policy directions done during last 10 years or so with Africa, and how our relations has been nurtured over the years with Africa. And thereafter I'll talk about the recent developments in terms of the challenges and the opportunities, how both countries are fostering a relationship, and analyze those issues. India and Africa have been friends, have long-standing historically, culturally, and trade and economic particularly with Eastern Africa and Southern Africa, and now more so for the entire 54 countries of the Africa. India had supported many countries in Africa in attaining their independence soon after our independence. That was our main focus, to help them in getting their independence from their colonial masters. And since then, India has been focusing, our main foreign policy towards Africa was to give them a strength in running their own government, and also building infrastructure, institutional governing systems, and also providing capacity building in their day-to-day administrations. That has been our foreign policy focus since their independence. And then our flagship programs started early 60s. One of them is ITEC, you all must be aware, and our maximum capacity under ITEC goes to only Africa and today. And one of the largest program in that direction is online education, tele-education, telemedicine, which was started in 2009, and now the currently second phase is going on. When we started in 2009, there was no internet connection provided in the country, and then we had in Africa, and we had started with a satellite assistance and providing with our own infrastructure systems, and today the slightly better off. And we also had given institutional support, setting up their most important institutions, including defense sectors, where we had set up their army academies, naval academies, training centers in several countries. And we started, our support in infrastructure is in recent, last 15-20 years or so, since we undertaken the summit level interactions. And since then, we have been providing through concessional financings, grants, etc. Most important areas we touch upon with Africa today is education and health sector. This is where we consider that education is a primary instrument for any economic development in those countries. And India offers scholarships to come and study here, and also provide training skills. Over setting up our training centers in Africa, and also offering online education, that is most important. And then our healthcare system also extended to a great extent to many countries in Africa. Since I can say last 2 decades, our exchange at the political level has multiplied at the highest levels, and then ministerial level, official levels, and the interactions have gone up many-fold, both at official level as well as the private levels and business levels. And some of the flagship programs has been very successful in Africa, including providing training to the diplomats as well. This I have talked about. The capacity building is the instrumental in giving them a support. Well, we started at low level, our trade, though it is historically connected over 200 years or so. But today, if I look at our trade, bilateral trade between the continent, India and Africa, is over 100 billion. That is a remarkable achievement achieved despite several challenges and issues. And India also had gone a huge way in investing in various sectors in Africa. Today I look at a cumulative investment over 80 billion. It is estimated to be more, but we don't have right figures. But I always see that the figure is going up more and more. We also extended concessional loans to a great extent in every field. We have built iconic buildings in some of the countries, parliaments, infrastructure developments, hydropower projects, etc., etc. The few examples, and we have extended over 12 billion, out of which already spent handsome amount, over 7 billion or so, and that is where we stand. All this done without any expecting South-South cooperation. So that is where India had foreign policy focusing Africa, was not expecting any return on that. The new sectors in recent time, we also have excellent growth in that, and defense and maritime security. That is where we see that our trade passing through in certain areas is very critical, and particularly in Gulf of Guinea is about 40 billion trade is passing through every year. Now we need to protect our interest in that. So though we have a cooperation with several countries in that region, and we have joined the Gulf of Guinea Friends, where India is a member in that. And India is the first country in most of the disaster relief operations undertaken in recent times. This is where India, as I said, without expecting any return on this, India considers Africa as an old friend, and we continue to support in their strive for economic development. Disaster solution is another important aspect for us, and we have been helping them. With this, when India took over G20, the first thought about is how to bring African Union. When Senegal had approached last year, and Senegal was the African Union presidency, and their president had written as a president of the African Union that in the G20, Africa is deserving organization on par with European Union. Therefore, India as a friend and long-standing friendship we maintain, and particularly with development cooperation and a highly committed partner, it's a time for us to look at India as a good gesture to bring this membership, and we have done this. Well, under BRICS, I think also thought about it, and then we have given two countries support, Ethiopia and Egypt, as part of the BRICS members. And now one more, so representing Ethiopia East and Egypt North, and West is one vacant position available, I think most likely to be filled in the next summit. Though there was a move to fill some other country, but somehow it didn't happen. When you took over a G20 again, the first thing struck to our mind was how to bring all the concerns and issues of the global south. And our Honorable PM had taken initiative in conducting and interacting global leaders, South global leaders through virtual. And we have taken all those issues and reflected in the documents, in the final document. I'm sure you all would have seen some of the important developments in those documents. Let me talk about during COVID time, and India was the first country to reach out to most of the African countries, not only in supplying medicines in the first tranche, but we also had given our part in supplying vaccines through our own source and then through WHO. So India had given and reached to that, considering Africa as a most trusted partner in our outreach. The COVID had impacted in several ways, and particularly supply chain disruption, and no one could do anything. But however, India had agreed to restructuring the debt. In several Central and West African countries' requests, we have considered and restructured their debts and then postponed their payment to 2-3 years by. Therefore, India as one of the first country again to come forward and accept in the G20 framework as well. Now we see that many countries defaulting our payment loan, but we are still very concerned about their economies and their systems. And while COVID impact countries recovering slowly, and then suddenly the Ukraine-Russia conflict again disrupted. And the three important aspects of the disruption was the food, fuel, and fertilizer supply that had massively created shortage in the food supply to African countries. This is where India again had chipped in, and last year we have given concessional export to few countries, and this year again we have extended supply of the rice to most of the African countries. And now Israel and Palestine issue, another is going to impact massively. So most important, all these disruptions, I think the financing of the countries will go badly, and then that is where I think most of the countries will have to, particularly G20, will have to help these countries, and this is where the joining African Union into G20 will be a useful mechanism to help them. Well, I think there are more challenges than opportunities I see. Opportunities always there, but the opportunities doesn't come without helping mitigating their challenges. If I talk a few challenges which I come across during my interactions and then traveling to African countries, the most important impacting challenge is the climate change. In some of the countries, particularly Central and West Africa, desertification is taking place, and that is where people are displaced, and then some of the large-scale rivers running, and they all are disappearing. One of them is Chad Basin River. One of the is covering for 7-8 countries, and now suddenly disappeared. I think people have moved out from there, and then it's created a vacuum for the governance. And that is where the scope for the development of the conflict and then terrorism, etc. This is scope. So therefore, this is another impacting Africa, is a major challenge today in Africa. And I don't know how the Africa is going to meet under G20, and without proper funding, it won't be any result for them. And political instability I see particularly in Central and West, of course Sudan. These countries, there is some amount of sort of control mechanism through their political, the countries which have ruled earlier. I think that is the link, the trying to restructuring in the political reforms. In recent times, there are frequent coups taken place in these countries, not because of their own system is failed. It is because of the frequent interference by the countries which have ruled earlier. That is where the people are fed up, and they want to see as an officer in charge, and I see that on every interaction they clearly bring out this aspect, but nobody recognizes this, and they still continue to dominate in terms of the currency controlling, political controlling. Even they nominate the president, prime ministers who should be there. So this is all irritating in the current situation in the countries in Africa. They all know information is available everywhere, and so the young generation are completely different from the older generation. They want to have a change, and they want to rule by themselves. One country in particularly, Mali, they said Mali problem to be resolved by the Mali, not by outsiders. Therefore, it should be left to us. So this is another political instability, but there is what you call reforms taking place in the political system in most of the countries. I think that is better for that. Of course, the spread of terrorism for the different regions, and there's growing very fast. So another important aspect of the challenges is poverty and low literacy rate, and most of the countries are poverty. The countries which are extremely rich with the mineral resources, you see the population over 70% below poverty. That is unbelievable. I can't believe in a country like DR Congo, and the total mineral resource estimated to be about $25 trillion. That's equivalent to German and US economy. That country is 11 crore population, 110 million population. 50% is extremely in poverty situation. this is a very sad situation. It's a mismanagement and misrole. Several reasons it could be, then very difficult to underline. So from this situation, these countries have to come out, and I don't know how G20 will help them in mitigating those issues and helping them. Except G20 coming out heavily in terms of the funding to various issues. G20 again, I don't see any helpful instrument. Of course, poor infrastructure developments, lack of institutional governing systems. Most of the countries lack proper governing mechanisms, and probably capacity building is not there. And then lack of funds is the most important. But some of the countries are extremely doing very well, and some countries really lacking behind. And hope, like India has always been on forefront in helping them, I think other countries also should come forward and help them. And G20 is an instrument which will help. But opportunities are more in several sectors, and I think that I'll leave it to the public for the next session. Probably with this, I thank you very much, sir, for giving this opportunity, sharing. But really very happy to conduct this so that you can spread and create awareness of what are the challenges currently. It's not just financing. There are several other issues which are required to be handled. Thank you.
Thank you so much, His Excellency, for an insightful inaugural address. Now it's time we delve into our first session, the African story. We turn our attention to an essential narrative that is shaping the continent's future. The African Union's Agenda 2063 is more than just a plan. It is a bold vision for transforming Africa into a global powerhouse of the future. This strategic framework embodies the Pan-African drive for unity, self-determination, progress, and collective prosperity. It focuses on the continental priorities of Africa with a clear objective to deliver inclusive and sustainable development. This vision aspires to place Africa at the forefront of global leadership in sectors such as agriculture, infrastructure, healthcare, education, and the enhanced value of African commodities. As we move into our first session on the African story, I have the pleasure of introducing our esteemed panelists of the day. First of all, I'd like to welcome a moderator for this session, Ambassador Dr. Mohan Kumar. He's the director of the Jindal Global Center for G20 Studies. With a distinguished career in Indian Foreign Services, he has served as India's ambassador to France, among other significant postings. His diplomatic acumen has been pivotal in strengthening strategic partnerships in various sectors, and he continues to contribute to academia as the Dean of the Office of International Affairs and Global Initiatives and as a professor at the Open Jindal Global University. Thank you so much, Dr. Kumar. I would like to welcome our panelists for the day. We are honored to have with us His Excellency Shri Sevala N. Mude, Additional Secretary of the Central and West African Division, Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. His extensive diplomatic career and profound insights into the region make him a valuable presence in our discussion today. We're also privileged to have with us His Excellency Professor Victor Mukonka, the Chargé d'Affaires of Zambia to India. His role in representing Zambia's interests in India and his deep understanding of African affairs will undoubtedly enrich our conversation. Lastly, we welcome His Excellency Doto, Consul of Tanzania to India, who brings valuable insights from his diplomatic services. His contribution to strengthening Tanzania's relations with India are commendable. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to all our distinguished guests. Over to you, Professor Kumar.
Thank you very much for this. For the inauguration, Ambassador Mude, I thought those were very relevant remarks that you made on climate change. I was very struck by what you said about desertification, the disappearance of rivers. I was not aware of this, because when we talk of climate change in the context of developed countries, all the time they're talking in terms of mitigation, how greenhouse gases can be reduced, how India should not burn coal, how China should stop burning coal, and the rest of it. Very few people talk about the issues that you highlighted, which is a wholesale disappearance of rivers, which means populations get displaced, and desertification. I see very little focus on those things. So that is extremely important. My first question to you obviously is in the light of the G20. What is I mean, how important is it that we have managed to get the African Union into G20? I think a lot has been said about this contributing to the voice of the global South. That seems obvious to me. But now that African Union is in the G20, what we will also ask our African friends is that how is African Union going to exploit this opportunity is what I'm interested in. Maybe Ambassador Mude, you can begin by saying what was India's perspective in getting G20. But sir, if you can focus a little bit on how African Union hopes to exploit this opportunity. After all, it's an opportunity, right? And you have to make it count. So that would be of some importance to this gathering going forward. There are going to be other G20 summits. We're going to have a virtual summit. Then Brazil will take over. So what is it that the African Union proposes to do with this such an important membership that has been achieved? Ambassador Mude, I'll request you first. Use this mic.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Well, India had seen Africa with 54 countries, and 54 countries are at different stages of sizes, development, and issues and problems. They don't agree each other. Say, to begin with, the India-Africa Forum Summit we have done last time in 2015. We wanted to do it on the same scale or different format. But some of the big countries, they said, how can you bring small countries on par with us? So therefore, you can't treat big countries on par with a small country in Africa. But again, Africa is not homogeneous. It reflects several things. So when you have a 54 countries making into one voice, will reflect the ground reality, the reality of the Africa. Therefore, India had considered that Africa as a major supplier of the resources to the world, and with the 54 countries together, one single continent should be part of the G20. And South Africa doesn't really reflect our for the entire continent. That is one we thought about it, and there has been grievances from the various countries in Africa that why nobody serious about Africa, and then no other countries they think about Africa's economic development or future, etc., etc. So everyone comes there for the exploitation of the mineral resources, and they look at countries' resources, and then after that they don't even turn back. So it is India all along has been, since their independence, working towards in economic development of the country, the overall improvement of the countries. Therefore, India has seriously considered it, enter Africa deserving a place on par with the other countries in the G20.
If you can try and address the same issue, what are the broad inferences that you draw from the admission of the African Union into the G20? Thank you.
Good evening, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity. I'm Cedrick Crowley. I'm the Chargé d'Affaires for South Africa, and I'm happy to be here with you and to represent the continent, even though we don't speak on behalf of the continent. Excellencies, I'm not sure if you followed the General Assembly debates recently. If you've listened to African leaders, even the financing conference that took place in France, Paris, the Africa that countries dealt with 10, 15 years ago is no longer the Africa lying dormantly, begging. It's an assertive Africa, an Africa with voice, an Africa that has been enriching countries of the North, an Africa whose minerals are the future. Whether it's in technology, whether it's in e-batteries, countries need Africa more than they think. It's not a matter of Africa having been offered any favors, we constitute a significant percentage of global population, its resources and its wealth. Perhaps the wealth was exploited by others at our expense, but that is not continuing. If I can give you the example of Botswana and their negotiations with the bears, it's no longer business as usual. This continent represents 1.3 billion people, one economy of 3 trillion. It's on par with India.
Yes.
And so why should we not have a voice? Why should we not be represented and given voice in the institutions of finance, of decision making? That is the question. We've seen in BRICS the focus of the South African presidency on Africa, the whole focus thereof, and of course the inclusion of 2 additional states. My fear is that this continent should not become the victim again of geopolitical struggles and positioning. What I think we do have is an institutional structure, and perhaps that will assist us in giving voice to the 50, because we are also diverse. We are not homogeneous. And so I think through the institutions that exist, the African Union, the blueprint we have, Agenda 2063, that will be the policy that we will be advocating. That is aligned to Agenda 2030. And what we are demanding is that the world respond to the promissory note that they issued when we adopted the 2030 agenda. They said they would do a number of things. Even in climate change, the very rivers that we are concerned about, my neighbor Botswana, Mozambique, almost lost its secondary city through climate activities. And yet our contribution to climate change is so minuscule, I think less than 1%. So it's a question of justice. And so what we are bringing to the fore is the voice of those that have been marginalized at the expense of their own people. And so the demand is, Africa is no longer calling for this, as my ambassador said in that previous intervention of his at the earlier event. We are done with calling. We demand a seat. We insist on the seat. We will have those seats. It is as simple as that. I mean, if you look at trade, if the first movers, if you are not in Africa contributing to its industrialization, to its production capacity, you are denying yourself an opportunity to have access to a market that is significant. I mean, Africa with India is the growth. It's the growth pillars of this global economy in the coming years. And so I think I'm very encouraged and I'm very happy, and we commend the Indian presidency and His Excellency Prime Minister Modi for the initiative that he took. I think what has happened here must also be reflected in the multilateral system. How do you exclude India from decision making, whether it be in the Security Council? How do we do that? I mean, this Security Council we speak about is so dysfunctional, we saw it now. The duplicity of the Security Council and some members of that P5 in what amounts, in our view, to war crimes, and the different ways in which they are addressing issues of, as they call it, what's this word? It's, not colonialism, it's occupation. Some countries can be occupied for 75 years, others for a few months, and then the whole world must come to a standstill. Not that any of that is correct, but the double standards, the moral authority of that world, its legitimacy will be undermined. And I think when we come as developing countries, knowing the suffering of our people, we can contribute significantly to the discourse to ensure that those that are marginalized now find expression and find inclusion. But we also bring a significant wealth. I mean, you've just quoted the DRC, one of the richest countries in the world. The richest countries on paper. And through no fault of their own, are not developing to the extent that they should. So that should stop. That will stop. And the African Union I think as one of the youngest nations, the Africa, I mean, in terms of decolonization, we've been there all along. So in terms of institution building, we are quite advanced. I mean, if you look at the kind of decisions we can take a Peace and Security Council, you know what I think, Excellency? If this UN is not serious about their reforms and governance systems, the African Union is quite capable. We have a Peace and Security Council. Who do you think is the first persons to go into war zones other than the Africans? The UN and the member states are prepared to give money, and we are prepared to give blood. And that is how it's been to peace. And then they will moralize this issue and talk how great they are. But we are the ones that ensure that there's peace in our continent, that there's development. So I think this is an interesting debate. I hope we have more time in future to address this. But it's an exciting time to be alive. It's an exciting time to be African. It's an exciting time to be Indian. And together we will lead this world into growth, into greater prosperity, into a fairer world, because as you say, we are one planet and we are all family. And we must ensure that every one of us enjoys equal rights, equal protection, equal economic, perhaps not equal economic disparity, but at least that the inequality is at least addressed. That climate change is addressed, because that will save lives. And so you see there were promissory notes even in terms of climate funding. And I'm happy that the principle of common but differentiated responsibility has been again reenshrined in the outcome document, because there has been an attempt to make us equally responsible, not only for climate change, but for the funding, without giving us the resources which they've promised and which they should deliver, because of their historical contribution to the challenge. But let me not preach anymore and allow you to ask your other questions. Thank you.
No, I am so happy that, yes, I think that deserves huge applause. Thank you so much. And I hope it will encourage some of your other colleagues to come forward as well, because the purpose of this conference is not to listen to me, and with due respect to the chief policy maker of Africa and the Ministry of External Affairs. We know those views, and it's of course always interesting to hear from you, but we want to hear also from the stakeholders. My next point really to the two gentlemen I have to my left is that it's well known that if Agenda 2030 has to be achieved in full, two regions will matter. One is Sub-Saharan Africa, the other is South Asia. No other region matters, frankly, because if you're going to say SDG number 1, no poverty, the large numbers are basically in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. So if I asked you, what are the two important obstacles to this agenda being achieved? Because very frankly, it's clear to me and others that because of the double whammy, that is first the pandemic and then the war in Ukraine, which has led to food insecurity, fuel inflation, fertilizer, and so on, I think it's clear to me that 2030, we will not be, for example, able to achieve SDG number 1, which is no poverty, or even completely abolishing extreme poverty. Forget about no poverty, that's not going to happen. But even extreme poverty, which has now been defined by the World Bank as $2.19, don't ask me why 2.19, but 2.19 per head per day, if you establish that as the criterion, I'm afraid, if I may be allowed, and I'm no longer in service, so you have to be more careful, not me. I think India will also find it difficult to achieve an eradication of extreme poverty by that date, by 2030, and certainly Sub-Saharan Africa. So can I ask both of you from India's perspective, and certainly our colleague from South Africa, what are the two things that need to be done in order for Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia to have a fair shot at achieving those SDGs? Otherwise, what's the point, as our South African colleague put it so eloquently, you keep repeating the same thing and saying we'll do this, we'll do that. As he rightly says, we all know the problems, but we need the money, right? And my question after that, which I can combine both those questions, how do you force this agenda? That's the question, really. I mean, making a speech is one thing, getting people to be interested in your issues is another. How do you force a change in the rules of the game? That is, I think, the challenge, frankly, for India and for Africa. But I give it to you, sir, first to give your perspective, and then our friend from South Africa.
Well, thank you very much, sir. I look at this way. Most important aspect of the achieving is financing and funding. And from your own definition, 2.1, a country like Nigeria, which is the largest economy in Africa, and today they are the largest supplier of crude oil. I think India imports about 13% of the energy security from Nigeria. Their population is about 200 million, out of which 50% is below $1 they earn. So that is the clear-cut definition. Given the size of the economy, country size, resources, we're still struggling to survive. Look at other countries in the regions: Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Gambia. I find it extremely difficult to achieve this. Even 40-50, the target for the South Africa, Africa Plan 2063, also not possible to achieve that, unless everyone in the world is committed to look after Africa. Because Africa is the only country supplies maximum natural resource to the world. In turn, they have to look after Africa. If that doesn't happen, then will never happen anything in Africa. This is what I look at. Well, the most important agencies, the two, World Bank and IMF. World Bank to some extent helping in mitigating certain issues, infrastructure, the most important critical areas like housing, water, health, etc. But IMF comes with a stick. Okay, you want money, I'll give you, but you bring these changes. By virtue of that, they lose out their economic progress. Next, it will go down to next 20 years, 30 years. By that time, they lose out their progress in the world. So IMF is another which has to change their mindset, and they have to liberally provide funding to the Africa. And Africa, as such, as a union, should come forward and strengthen their internal financial systems. And they also look at the resources supply and how that can be safeguarded, their income from the various mineral resources. And again, this self-discipline is also required for them. Then only it's possible to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you again for the opportunity. I'll try and be shorter this time. I think when the SDGs were adopted, what made it different from other promissory notes that were issued was that this time it came back with a nice package. It was called the means of implementation. So under each SDG, you'll find out this is what we are committing to, both developed and developing world. The question is whether we have addressed that issue. You know, there's one issue that plagues Africa. We lose, I think, in excess of 80 billion, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of illicit finance. It's perhaps not that much. It's 50 billion in terms of a study conducted by Mbeki and other eminent leaders. 50 billion in illicit financial flows, mostly resulting also from trade mispricing and under invoicing. So I think blockchain can perhaps India can assist us with that. But at any rate, that's a significant amount. That's a lot of money. It's even in terms, if you even compare that to ODA. I mean, ODA we don't want per se. Huh? We want the rules to be equal. Your WTO rules, we talk about the rules-based international order. We don't have an appellate body because of some countries not allowing that. Agricultural subsidies, a cow being subsidized more in Europe than the per capita we spend on ODA or whatever development assistance on agriculture. So the system, I mean, the rhetoric may have changed in when we adopted SDGs, but our practice has continued, and so we need to have a mind change. We have to be serious. Climate change, you know, the infrastructure we lose and the money we have to pay on rebuilding that infrastructure. COVID, where was the world when Africans were dying? People in the global south were dying. When we were telling the WTO, change this IP rules. It's a process India and South Africa led there, supported later by the African Union in mass. You've been placing profit about people's lives, and we will never forget that. That at the stage when we needed the world, forget about SDGs and those promises. We are talking about people dying here today, and you tell us that we can't do the relaxed IP rights. It took us how many months to negotiate for you to hoard the COVID vaccines? This is not when I say you, my friends, I love you all. I love you all. Decisions by governments and pharma. Therein lies this injustice, isn't it? That we have taken humanity, and I like the human-centric approach that India followed in the G20. We've taken humanity out of the equation. Whether we die as Africans and Latin Americans and the Caribbean, it mattered not. As long as my population, let me tell you that, everyone was having this rhetoric. No one will be safe until everyone is safe. How do we, sorry, I almost used
four-letter words.
I almost use a word that is very undiplomatic. Is this thing being recorded? No, we withdraw those words. No, no one is safe until everyone is safe. Yet you deny billions of people access to the vaccine that would even keep you safe at the end. The same with climate change. You are supposed to give us the money, the historical legacy of your development and industrialization. So, economies are destroyed as a result of climate change. This migration challenge that everyone is building walls up and preventing ships from coming, you're not going to solve that problem if you don't develop and assist us in developing our people. So it was and that COVID and this climate change challenges have led to unsustainable debt in our countries. You know that this world, I think there are 70 countries that are facing serious debt challenges. And as you say, Excellency, this thing will come with prescriptions. Cut education, reduce budget. My friend, that medicine has not worked ever. Why don't we change this ideological approach to a debt restructuring? And so we need to change that mindset. So some of the issues are systemic, some is, it's probably very nice. Someone was asking, I think it's one of the presidents in East Africa, he was saying, this thing of countries summoning Africa, come. We'll have a summit. So it's one leader meeting 50 odd African leaders. One leader. Who are you to summon 55 Africa? Sorry. Hey, this thing should be under different rules in future, no? So that it doesn't become so public. But at any rate, our presidents also mentioned it. So you summons us and it looked very nice. It's a nice photo opportunity. We leave there very much encouraged. And then nothing or very little happened. So that is the challenge. I think we should just give effect to what we promised already. Thank you so much.
So thank you. I'm going to throw this open for questions. First preference to Africans. You will forgive me. But I really want to hear from our African friends. I just want to make 2 points. One is that I think Africa has enormous clout. That is my recollection of the politics of negotiations in the WTO. In Doha, when we achieved the TRIPS, the declaration on TRIPS and public health, I was actively involved as an Indian negotiator. I can tell you India and Brazil could not have done this without Africa. We were able to achieve this only because of Africa, only because of the AIDS problem in Africa and the NGOs and others which helped us. So I think our South African friend has got a point. So I would stress 2 things. One, African unity is important. And don't take this the wrong way, but I saw this in WTO, that if the Africa group in various fora stands together, it's impossible for the world to ignore Africa. Trust me, it's not easy. It's not easy. India is used to being alone, by the way. I must tell you this as an Indian negotiator. We are used to being alone, it's fine. We are sui generis in any case. But I think if Africa can be united, and for India, The partnership with Africa is important, because I have gotten into trouble when I was a serving diplomat when I said that India is not just a developing country but also a least developed country. I'm choosing my words carefully. Parts of India are actually least developed. I have lived in Congo, Kinshasa, for 3.5 years. So I know Africa. It's not like I don't know Africa. But I can tell you that what the poverty I saw in Kinshasa, to my great surprise, was actually slightly better than the poverty I saw in India in some areas. Which is why I say very frankly that India is both a developing and a least developed country. Of course, we have made progress in India, but there are different Indias in India. We are not one country. Everybody knows that. The second thing that I want to say before I throw it open for questions is that if critical minerals are the future, and if Africa is the place where critical minerals are located in great quantities, then I think Africa should be a little bit more careful in allowing the exploitation of these minerals by powers. You should wake up and make sure that you just don't throw it open for auction and say, first come, first serve, take it away. It's up to you. It's your resource. So to some extent, I would say that as well. Again, not to be misunderstood. I genuinely think Africa can achieve a lot if it is united, and if it makes a point. It's easy to ignore India, ladies and gentlemen. I've seen that happen in the WTO. It's easy to ignore. Uruguay round, we were ignored. But Africa was not present at all in the Uruguay round. That's my problem. We were present and we were ignored. But if Africa was there, and if India and Africa together pursue some of these objectives, it's impossible to ignore. So I would not give you this impression that Africa is somehow helpless or anything like that. I agree with our South African friend that you should stop demanding. You should start demanding. Stop imploring from people. You deserve it. Yes, absolutely.
The G20, recognizing the importance of comprehensive reforms in multilateral development, has placed special emphasis on enhancing their effectiveness, with a particular focus on Africa. This dynamic region holds immense significance as a provider of critical raw material and possesses the potential to become more deeply integrated into the global value chains. In this session, we will explore the multifaceted role of these organizations in Africa's development journey. Our esteemed panelists will share their insights and expertise, shedding light on the collaborative efforts that are shaping the future of the continent. It is my pleasure to introduce to you all our moderator for this session, Ms. Nandita Baruah. We also have in the
Thank you so much.
We also have in the panel Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, a distinguished fellow in the Foreign Studies program at Gateway House Foundation, with an illustrious career spanning diplomacy and leadership roles in various organizations. He is a prolific author and a commentator on foreign policy and diplomacy. His deep insights and contribution to global discourse are invaluable. Joining us is Professor Dr. Hebatallah, an academician, editor, and scholar with a rich background in international economic development. As the Assistant Dean for Academic Affairs at Jindal School of International Affairs and the founding director of the Jindal Global Center for Global South, she is at the forefront of research and collaboration on Global South studies.
Right. I think, given the conversations we have had, I'm actually going to change the format a little bit. I'm going to start by making quickly a quote. Ambassador Bhatia and Professor Hebatallah is on the African Union Agenda 2063, which was quoted just in the previous session. And it talks about Africa being a blueprint and master plan for transforming Africa into a global powerhouse. It talks about the strategic frameworks aims to deliver on its goal for inclusive, sustainable development, and it's also a concrete manifestation of Pan-American drive for unity, self-determination, freedom, progress, and collective prosperity. What it is trying to focus on are the continental priorities for Africa, which is facilitating its position in the global leadership, and I want to emphasize on that, led by sustainable inclusive development and looking at emerging opportunities for development in sectors like agriculture, infrastructure, healthcare, education, and enhanced value for African commodities. Now, in the backdrop of that larger global vision statement for Africa, and what we just heard about the fact that while there is a common vision statement, there are also challenges. I am going to first open up the floor to both of you, and I'm going to start with you, Ambassador Bhatia, about just your initial thoughts and comments on how do you think that that aspiration that's been put in the Agenda 2063 can be actualized, not just from within what we need Africa to do, but from looking at the world in terms of global institutions, other countries, multilateral, because this can't be a singular journey for the African nation on its own. It has to look at the support that comes from the world at large. What would be your take on what can be done and how can it be done?
Thank you very much, Nandita ji. There's a great collaboration between Jindal University and Asia Foundation. They have raised a topic which is on many of our minds. The time is now for a kind of a collective thinking, so that some kind of a consensus, some kind of a common view emerges between India and Africa as to what are the next steps after having looked at the precise topic here. We are not now in the second session perhaps talking in general terms of the African story. We are situating it in the specific context of the fact that just about a month back, the decision was implemented to bring African Union into G20. It is a fact. And the implementation manner was most impressive. Normally, it would have been left to the next summit. But within the few minutes of the opening session of G20, AU became the member of G20. This is something that we need to note, and this reflects the characteristic, speedy and effective style of the Indian presidency. So in that light, before I really answer, or maybe I'll be able to answer in terms of some opening remarks I have prepared, because here we really cannot believe in giving speeches. I must say, when I entered the room, I asked myself as to what I would expect, because for the last 1 month, I'm only reading the Indian press and foreign press saying what a great job India has done to help bring African Union into G20. So I was expecting that our African brothers and sisters will be holding my hands and congratulating me and saying what a great job you people have done. In fact, what happened was totally in contrast. Our South African friend who spoke so well, and that country I know a little bit, and he knows G20 well. He has been part of the G20 from the beginning. But I noticed sadly that the excitement is lacking in this room. And so I'm going to address the fundamental question which is asked in the topic here. What are the possibilities, how to go about it? So essentially the emotion today is great. African Union is in G20. Wonderful. Now what next? How do we leverage this momentous historic achievement? It certainly is momentous because this is the first time G20 has ever been expanded. And it has been expanded when others had tried and failed. It didn't just happen because someone had a magic wand. A year of hard work went into this. And then the result followed, as I explained, in such a dramatic manner that long time Africa watchers were totally overwhelmed to see President of Comoros being escorted by Foreign Minister Jaishankar to the President, embraced, and immediately the seat was ready for him to take over, as if this was the most natural thing was happening in the history of G20 that goes beyond 2 decades. So it was historic, it was momentous, and I appeal to my African brothers and sisters to really appreciate the significance of this achievement. So now, what to do next? And I request you to forgive me for my immodesty, but I would like to quote one sentence from my book on India-Africa relations. which appeared in November 2021. That is exactly about 2 years back. And I answered this question on page 199. And I said, this, meaning India's presidency, and 3-year long tenure as the member of Troika will be a most suitable period to integrate key concerns and projects of Africa into the G20 agenda. This is the answer to the topic that has been raised. How to integrate Africa's concerns into G20. Now, G20 belongs to Africa, and Africa has to work together with like-minded countries to see that what has been achieved in the Indian presidency continues, is consolidated, and is expanded. If we can do that, that would be wonderful. And without stretching Nandita ji's patience too much, I just want to very quickly and briefly mention 5 significant elements on the basis of which this can be achieved. First, African Union has to prepare itself institutionally. This G20 membership is a massive responsibility. On the African Union side, there are 3 or 4 key mechanisms. There is the chairman of the African Union. There is the Troika, the past, present, and future chairman of African Union. There is the chairman of the African Union Commission, and maybe the deputy chairman. And all these 4 people, they really are the brain trust, so to say, of African Union. They have to now get together and plan the strategy. They will have to produce a plan, and I'm sure the work has perhaps started on that, in terms of both what policy you want to adopt towards G20 and what kind of personnel support you need for this heavy responsibility. It is not just one man sitting at that fancy round table or oval table of 21 people now. Now let's be very clear, G20 is work streams of the finance track, is the working groups of Sherpa track, it is the ministerial meetings, it is the engagement groups, and on top of there are many side meetings and many special events as well. So to prepare for this whole plethora of meetings, Africa has to be ready, and Africa cannot merely depend on the African Union. It will have to also take a lot of help from the African governments. So if on engagement group dealing with women, there is a specialized interest, say in Zambia, they will have to be brought forward. If there is someone who is more interested in DPI and that expertise is not there in Ethiopia at the headquarters of African Union, it will have to be pulled in from some other country, and that is how we will be able to muster support on Pan-Africa wide. So let's be very clear that it is a huge responsibility, much work awaits, and it is not just a question of coming in as a member waiting for all others to do things for you. As my South African colleague said, we will have to work together and we will have to fight for it. Yes. My second level I would like to make very clear, and I'm now going to be very brief, is that Africa has to support the idea, the conception of the global South. We all know that Africa is the heart of the global South, but today Africa alone cannot fly. It is a globalized world. There are other sectors of underdevelopment. They are in South Asia. Mohan has repeatedly mentioned that. Central Asia, South Pacific, Latin America. It is very good that India has been able to accord the highest priority to Africa, and that is why African Union is inside G20 today. But Africa should support us with regard to the global South approach. And I'm very happy to learn that there is some plan to hold the second Voice of Global South Summit by India. November 19th, it is coming. So this is something that many of you would find it news, but it is something very, very important. And in that context, I think there is already now government's serious thinking about speeding up the decisions that were taken in the first summit. Implementation is being reviewed at the highest possible levels. So keep in mind the Global South issue. And my third and last point here is that in this entire G20 context, the India-Africa equation, that will need to be further expanded, consolidated, strengthened, diversified. Because these things do not fly on their own. They work when the two conventional, mutually reliable, trustworthy partners work together very strongly. So to answer in short as to how the larger challenges can be met, I think some of us have been studying critically G20's achievement, particularly the New Delhi Declaration. And I must be very frank, while political leaders have to talk big, and they have talked big, they have said that we don't need billions, we need trillions, which is a wonderful phrase. But in this very room, there were world-level experts who said, if you can't get billions, where are you going to get trillions? So an equally compelling question. So I would say my answer to that is that political leaders are obviously very important, but finance ministers are even more important. What finance ministers are doing in the multilateral development banks reform, especially our young scholars here, they must very closely study what is happening there. In the last 1 week, a lot of material has emerged. So I think my final message is we should be excited, we should be happy, but now that test is gone. Now we have to prepare for the next phase and we can do it together.
Thank you. I think excellent. I'm going to take this and phrase it and then hand it also over to you, Professor Hebatallah. That I know we've talked about the fact, and I think the excitement about the seat in the table is the first step. But the next step is the voice in the table. And how Africa curates that voice is going to be important, not just for Africa, but I think for the world. Because how Africa curates that voice in the table is what is also going to help us look at what, as you rightly said, is what is the southern narrative of South-South? And I feel that it's probably something that we would need to look at is, and I really like the thing about, how do we reimagine globalization from that perspective? How do we reimagine globalization not based on what the existing established northern powers have defined globalization to be, but what the global south and Africa critically would like to see globalization be defined as, and take the opportunity to define those parameters of where we would like to move in that development. So I think seat at the table is the first step, but getting the voice and getting the voice right is the next critical step. And how we work towards that is going to be important for Africa and for the world at large, and definitely for India as a country which is facilitating the seat, but needs to facilitate and ensure that the voices are taken into account. I'm going to hand over to you, Professor Hebatallah.
Before starting, I would like to thank, of course, Professor Dr. Ambassador Mohan Kumar for extending his invitation to me to join you all today, and his dedicated team and Asia Foundation. So in the next slides, I will share my overview of Africa's development and finance challenges and opportunities. So I would like to start first by sharing with you what are the main challenges that Africa is facing, and I will try to be concise in sharing the information. So first of all, African countries primarily participate in the global economy through global value chain or supply chains, and however their involvement in supply chain is minor and so much limited to supply of raw materials and low value manufactured goods. And this is the main reason that African nations, they are not able to fully participate in that global market. So this is the first point. Secondly is that Africa, there is lots of imbalanced relations with external actors. And we can see this imbalanced relationship with external actors through the unequal trade relationships, unfavorable terms of trade, and limited access to markets for African products. Besides this relationship with external actors, also it has been mentioned in the previous sessions that there is lots of internal obstacles, which includes the weak infrastructure, and we have already discussed the weak infrastructure, and there is so much limited access to finance, especially in landlocked and least developed African nations in sub-Saharan region, and of course lots of challenges related to access not only to finance but also to technology. One more main challenge that I consider from my point of view as the main challenge to the integration of Africa to the global market is that Africa is having a significant low ranking in the intra-African trade is so much less if we are comparing to other regions of the world. Like for example, in Europe, it goes up to 70%, the intra-European trade. In Asia, 60%, in North America, 54%. And the reasons for that is that first, as we have mentioned this, that there is many of African nations, they are isolated, they are small countries, and of course besides that there is obstacle in geographical landscape and access to main ports and to sea. It is difficult. So all these challenges, we can say, they are definitely hindering Africa's ability to benefit from the global economic integration. So now we understand there is a real problem in Africa development challenges, and this problem needs to be addressed. And one of the main solution is to get assistance from international organization, and even as we are going to see, regional organization. So the development finance to support Africa. Starting first by the traditional development finance, IMF and World Bank, and what we call as Bretton Woods institutions. So the traditional development finance, actually, it has long been criticized for its Western-centric approach. So you all know that Bretton Woods institutions, they are like pushing African nations to adopt not only Western financial system, but also to adopt Western rules, which is not suitable for African countries. So this approach has led to several problems or negative consequences on African nations. First of all, there is imbalanced power dynamics. So African countries often face conditioned aid and debt traps, and which is, of course, is limiting their policy autonomy and hindering their development efforts. Besides that, there is a lack of alignment with African priorities. Western institutions or international financial institutions, they focus more on Western values and priorities, which are not effectively addressing the unique challenges faced by African nations. Besides that, there is other also points to mention here, like limited consideration to local context and specific needs of African countries, insufficient support for regional integration, and this is a main point here. This is a cornerstone in our analysis. The regional integration, usually traditional traditional development finance has been criticized for not adequately supporting regional integration efforts in Africa. Also, besides that, there is inadequate attention for social and environmental sustainability, lack of focus on poverty reduction, and finally, limited impact on economic growth. So therefore, we can say that there is a need for alternative approaches to development finance in Africa that prioritize poverty reduction, align with African priorities, empower African countries, and promote sustainability and inclusive development. So if we would like to give a prescription of reforms to multilateral and international financial institutions to find a suitable solution for African nations. So what could be these recommendations that we can give to multilateral and international financial institutions? First of all, is they should consider the specific political and economic context of African countries while they design and implement reforms. They should also try to support and to create an enabling environment for reforms in Africa, support data collection and analysis efforts to better understanding the relationship between regulatory reforms and economic growth in African countries, implementing necessary reforms to maximize the potential gains for regional integration. Again, this is an important point. And since, as you are aware, that Washington Consensus reforms were universally unsuccessful in most of African nations, and especially in sub-Saharan Africa. So multilateral and international financial institutions should focus on building the capacity of African countries to effectively implement reforms. So it is not anymore about dictating that set of 10 Washington Consensus recommendations. So they should work more on building the capacity of African nations. And finally, they should support African countries in improving their business environment through regulatory reforms. So here I would like to underline one main point, is that usually the international financial institutions, they give a unified set of reforms to African countries. And here this is not anymore suitable, especially after all the crises that we are facing every day. So we need to say that, I need to tell here that international organization or international financial institutions, they should provide tailored and more specific solution to African countries that to be more adequate to their own context. So we cannot give anymore that set of 10 recommendations of the Washington Consensus. Now here, this is how the restructuring of international financial institution debt policies. So this can happen through allowing tailored solution, as I have mentioned. Also, one more point is the early intervention and turnaround strategies to address financial distress by supporting developing countries, especially African nations, in implementing proactive measures to address debt vulnerabilities before they get escalate. And another point is to enhance, to establish an enhanced debt transparency, especially that transparency and timely flow of information are main pillars for stable capital flow and fair debt restructuring. And finally, strengthening institutional framework. And this can be done by adopting policies that protect trade integration, permit exchange rate flexibility, and contain vulnerability. And the final point is by providing recommendation and debt relief actions, especially that international financial institutions, they do have that capacity of giving recommendations to debtor countries and multilateral lenders to address debt problems. So this is the first main player in the development finance is the traditional financial assistance given by international financial institution. But the interesting thing here is that to mention that we should shift our vision from traditional financial assistance towards more the regional development banks. So regional development banks, I have here, you can see some examples. One, of course, of the main regional development bank is African Development Bank. So we can say that regional development bank, they play a central role in implementing the global agenda on sustainable development, and they are well positioned to address contemporary challenges like climate change, conflicts, refugee crisis, poverty, health pandemics, and demography-induced problems. Of course, here, since we are speaking about Africa, so we can give that example of the African Development Bank. So the African Development Bank has developed over years different policies and strategies in support of broad-based human and economic development that has aligned with other continental initiatives of the African Union. And what is here is worth to mention is that the African Development Bank modeled its agenda to provide support to key areas. First, to support intra-African trade and investment, and this is the main criticism to the traditional development finance. Here, the regional development banks, they are addressing this point of trade integration, establishing attractive and larger markets in Africa, improving business environment, and connecting landlocked states to regional markets and beyond. So really that example of African development banks should be studied, and more support if India would like to give more support to Africa, it should be channeled through the African Development Bank. So in conclusion, we can say that generally speaking about the regional development banks. So regional development banks, they are promising, and they are positioned at the center of implementing the global agenda of sustainable development, as I have mentioned, and they do have the potential to drive investments, build capacity, and address various challenges faced by the African countries. So therefore, we should here give also some recommendations to the regional development banks in order to enhance their capacity for a maximum development impact. And these the recommendations that I would like to mention here for the regional development banks, first of all, is that they have to improve coordination and collaboration among themselves to avoid duplication of efforts and ensure efficient use of resources. It can be achieved through joint projects. Maybe the Asian Development Bank and African Development Banks, they can work together on some joint project. I'm nearly about to finish. This is my last slide. Other thing is that increasing financial resources to meet the growing demand for development finance. Maybe this can be done through new member countries. The new development bank, they have recently accepted new members to join, strengthening governance and accountability, focusing on sustainable development by promoting investment in renewable energy, climate change mitigation and adaptation, improving project selection and evaluation, strengthening capacity building, and promoting regional integration, embracing technology and innovation by adopting digital platforms for project monitoring and evaluation. So here I would like to conclude my presentation, and we can take the discussion forward.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Quite a comprehensive blueprint in terms of what can be done, because the key question was also about, I don't know whether my friend from IFC has left. She has left. I think it would have been an ideal time to have a discussion about how some of the selections of both projects and the selections of terms and conditions of financing can be revamped to do exactly what we have been hearing, is to really look at and more reimagined economic structure and system that responds to African realities and African needs, not something that's driven more from a perspective of institutions which were largely northern perceived and built. But the G20 really, as you said, Mr. Bhatia, opens up this opportunity to get this perspective going, to get this perspective of what are we talking about. And I think most of the leaders from the Global South talked about the need to really look at restructure the international institutions. Particularly Prime Minister Modi has been talking about it from a perspective which is more southern, from a perspective which is more contextual to the rest of the world, which is today developing fast, is becoming a resource base, both human and natural and capital, and getting them to respond to those needs rather than that of few global superpowers. But I will come to you on the regional question because I have something that just struck me as you said. But to you, Ambassador Bhatia, how do you see that role being played by the space given to the African Union at the G20? How do you see them being able to curate that conversation in the way that it benefits them both, as Professor Hebatallah and others have pointed out?
That is the central question now, and with so many African representatives sitting here, I think given the spirit of the dialogue, I'll be quite frank, because frankness among African and Indian friends pays. This is not strictly a diplomatic event. It is very much an academic plus event. So to answer your question, what I would essentially say is that Africa will have to now see how the next two presidencies of G20 take this thing forward. You have Brazil and then you have South Africa. Now, when next year Brazil handles its presidency, you will have a situation where some of the national assets that India deployed for the cause of G20, they might be missing there. President Lula is a very charismatic personality, but he's getting old. He's not the same Lula that we knew. And I have personally seen him in action with President Mbeki in a room. And of course, the other thing is that the moment you go beyond Africa, when you reach Latin America, somehow a lot of us think this is already periphery. So there is that problem as well. And frankly, I mean, I have to be very clear. There are very few leaders today who are as passionate about G20 as Narendra Modi is. So keeping all this in mind, I think the first thing African Union in particular should do is to open its offices in India, Brazil and South Africa. Certainly in India they don't have it, so they need to open. Because unless you create the diplomatic channel, how do you monitor what the thinking is and how do you contribute and how do you learn? Of course, you have the possibility to designate one of the African missions as the channel, but then create that mechanism. But otherwise, honestly, the national representatives, they all can justifiably feel G20, that is African Union. That is not my responsibility. I don't know why Dr. Mohan Kumar has invited me here. So this is one thing. Certainly India, I think, will welcome, looking at the history, to have an African Union diplomatic mission in Delhi. I think this is something we need to recognize very well. And my only second point is how this will be done and how this can be done is as a sequel to this wonderful event. And I'm putting this idea because MEA Additional Secretary is sitting here, so it will be going into the right years. There is a mutual sense of ignorance. You know, while we Africa Walas who deal with Africa, we think that Agenda 2063 of Africa is known to the whole world. The painful fact is it is not. You know, you cannot speak for beyond a few lines on Africa 2063 if you have not even read the basic document. So my first answer is that Africa and its friends such as India, we need to collaborate to disseminate information as to what 2063 is. What is this Africa, a peaceful, integrated, prosperous Africa that Africans want to build? So this is something very important. On the other hand, there is relative ignorance, if I may say so, in Africa about G20. As to what is this G20 that India decided to turn into a people's movement, people's G20. We knew G20, it started with 4 or 5 finance ministers. Then when West faced a major financial crisis, it was elevated to the level of the leaders. And since 2008, they have been meeting every year. But somehow, I mean, this is, please don't think that I'm saying this because I'm an Indian. First, I'm a scholar rather than an Indian. I do feel that when the history of G20 presidency's first cycle is written, which will be from 2008 to 2025, Indian presidency will go down as a memorable milestone. I don't have to go into that, all of you are following it. But the point I'm making is that India's help should be available to our African friends to learn a little bit more about G20. Because unless and until we develop that kind of two-way communication, I am afraid this membership will not be optimized for Africa, and we want a different outcome, a very positive outcome.